Yeah, I should bring that up. That I think Terry Jones referred to you as you're Mr. Teflon right up until the day you decided to sell the Trappers out of town.
Yeah,
You
no, he
took
didn't
some
like
grief.
it. He didn't like it. Hugh Campbell didn't like it. Hugh loved going down there. But here's the facts.
Yeah. Hey everyone, it's Rob Lullisher, and welcome to the Yegme podcast. Pretty excited about the guest we have today, and I should start by saying usually I'm the youngest and best looking Lullisher on the podcast, but today's podcast I'm only going to be one of those things. I'm very happy to have my dad, Rick Lullisher, join me on the Yegme podcast. Dad, how you doing?
Good. Glad to be here.
Well, I forced you into it. I made you come, and appreciate it because I'm really excited. You know, even from a personal front, that just as a way to capture, little stories that we may forget down the road, and a fun way to, talk about. You've been involved with a lot of significant Edmonton things over the years. We're going to talk a little bit about hockey and football and economic development and all kinds of fun stuff. See what comes up. You ready? Ready to do that?
Ready to go.
Okay, I'll call you Rick for the podcast. But I'll sneak in a dad there every once in a while. So and we'll jump to the end. We'll touch lightly on the part that why Edmonton's disowning you as as one of its sons. But we'll get to that in a minute. But let's go way back for a second. You know, the family's been in Edmonton for a very long time. So your grandfather, my great grandfather, Silas Lullisher, tell me about him coming to Edmonton and just why he chose Edmonton.
I think to get out of Prince Edward Island. I'm really not sure, but he left PEI in 1916.
Okay.
And ventured out here, and he didn't have a job, didn't have much money, and when he got here, there was a job opening at Western Transfer, and at that point in time, it was drays and horses, and so he took a job there and started and continued with it.
So the 1916, what did Edmonton look like at that time? Like, where was Western located? Was it downtown here?
Yeah, it was downtown, and originally the stables were part of the old Revlon building that's still there today. And as I understand it, that's where they kept the horses, and the drays were out back, and they'd go over to the CP and the CN rail lines to collect
right on 104th Ave there.
4th Avenue, and CP was on 109th Street.
Okay.
That came across the high-level bridge at the time. So, they'd pick up goods there to deliver, and they'd be off and deliver them to the stores.
It was kind of funny, 100 years later, I end up working at the Edmonton Journal for a number of years, and then remembering photos from 100 years ago, Western Moving having the horse and carriage with the tons of newspaper rolls on the back. They used to deliver all the journal's paper back then.
Oh, they did that for a lot of years. Actually, it continued at the Journal downtown until they built the new printing presses out on the southeast. Was maybe, I can't even remember. It was into the 70s for sure, maybe the 80s. And
it's a pretty long run, yeah.
We had to use very short trucks that could only haul 3 rolls at a time because they could only maneuver in the lane on 101st Street of the Journal building there to get into the elevator to make sure the rolls went down.
One roll at a time.
You got it.
Awesome. So Silas had Western Moving. It's 1916. He worked there for a number of years. Now, so between him and your dad Jim, my grandpa Jim, what was the transition of ownership from the two?
Well, I'm not sure of the years, but eventually my grandpa Si continued to work at Western Transfer. Then he ended up buying it for how much, or I have no idea. I don't think anybody did. Anyways, at some point, my dad came along and started working there just before the Second World War. and he bought a little piece of it, like I think around 10-15%. And then he went off to the war and became a police officer in the.
He was an MP.
In military police in the Air Force, and
Yep.
was located over in London, England. So Grandpa kept running the business, and at some point while Dad was over in England, Grandpa decided that there was going to be another recession like after the First World War.
Okay.
And he thought it would be best interest to sell the company. So he did, including my dad's 10%. So when Dad got back, the company had been
where's
sold.
my company?
Yeah, the company had been sold, no longer. So he knew the business, and he went to see the new owners, and they put him to work. So he started working when he came back from the war at Western, and then I think there was 5 different owners between the time Grandpa sold it and then Dad bought it back in 1962.
Okay.
Of the McCaig family out of Winnipeg at that time owned it, and they owned Manitoba Cartage and then Western Cartage, and so they were quite comfortable to put it back in the Lullisher family's hands and sold it to Dad.
So the roots of the moving business, Western Moving, back to 100 years ago. Today, your brother Ted, his son Sean, Carol, they own and run the business. Still in the moving game, still putzing along.
Still there, yeah.
Just I kind of feel like Grandpa Jim did. You sold the company before I could get involved. You just had me do all the sweat labor of being a swamper on the trucks for all those years.
That's so you'd learn.
And you know what? I do appreciate that learning. I think I was about 14 years old, and you stuck me in the warehouse to help them with the storage side. And then as soon as I could go out on the trucks, I was hawking furniture every summer for as long as I can remember. Okay, away from moving for a second. Growing up in Edmonton, what you ended up you were at Ross Shep, right?
Correct.
Now, put you on the spot. Did you graduate from Ross Shep?
I did.
You did?
I did. With the grade 12 graduation. I in my first year of grade 12, the counselor called me in and said, "You've got to make a decision, school or hockey." And at the time, I was playing for the Oil Kings, so I said hockey, of course, and went home and told my mom and dad what decision I'd made. And Dad said, "That's fine. Show up for work tomorrow morning in the freight sheds." And it was in the cold of winter, and if it was 20 below outside, it was about 40 below inside. So I unloaded boxcars and then would go to practice with the Oil Kings. And I was fortunate. A neighbor down the street by the name of Bill Rollins was a teacher at Ross Shep, and he'd started a business course in Ross Shep. So he convinced me to come back the following year, and I did. And that was just great. It gave me a business background, but it also gave me things that I use to this day, like typing skills and adding machine skills, all of that. I've used right through my career. And
so all your typing came from, we'll call it your grade 12 upgrade.
That's right, my second year grade 12.
Second year grade 12. Playing for the Oil Kings at that time. Tell us a little bit about your junior hockey career in Edmonton. What did that look like?
Well, I played 2 years in for the Canadian Athletic Club in the Alberta Junior League, and then went up to the Oil Kings for 2 years. And
you snagged a little award in the AJHL, did you not?
Yeah, Rookie of the Year. First one, Rookie of the Year. And
Rookie of the Year, very cool.
I don't even know what year it was.
Blast ahead, whatever it was, 30 years. One of my very good friends and a teammate that we grew up together, Terry Degner. I think we were teammates for 6 years before we played against each other, but he won Rookie of the Year too. So
that's right.
I remember that photo of the two of you posing with that. Very cool. So you're Rookie of the Year, the Movers, and then did you have to progress, or was it an option for you, a choice that you made between going from the Movers to the Oil Kings?
Well, in those years, it was before the draft, so that's how many years ago it was.
Yeah. So this is 66, 67.
Yeah, and there was 6 NHL teams, of which one was Detroit, and they'd always had a real closeness in Edmonton. One of their chief scouts, Clarence Moore, lived here, so they were very attached to the Oil Kings, and I really just, I guess, progressed up to the Oil Kings. And when I went to the Oil Kings, and Detroit put me on their 50 man roster that
Yep.
you were allowed to. And,
Okay.
and from that point in time, I was.
Which was was that considered like the draft at that point?
I guess so, yeah. Yeah,
Or
you were on
protected?
their list. You couldn't go anywhere else unless they traded you. So.
I see. Okay.
And then I signed at the time what's called a C form.
A C form?
Yeah, that was
Okay.
the contract with Detroit. I got $1,000
That's
to
that's
sign.
big money
That was
back
pretty,
then.
Pretty good.
That's
yeah.
really big money.
Yeah. So I played 2 years with the Oil Kings under Bill Gadsby was the coach 1 year until Bill Hunter fired him, and Bill became the coach. And then funny thing about when Gads got fired, we were in the first game of the playoffs. We were in Saskatoon in the old arena, not
Yep.
where you played, and we were out for the warm up, and the PA announcer comes on and says, "There's been a change in the Oil King lineup tonight. Coaching is Bill Hunter because he's just fired Bill Gadsby."
Verbatim.
And, we had not heard it. That's how we heard it. And,
As you're taking warm up.
so we played the game and we lost. But go back to the hotel, and Wes Montgomery at the time was doing the play-by-play for Chet, and he refused to do the game that night. So we got back.
Out of protest,
Yeah.
he was upset about.
He was upset about
the coach
Gads being
change?
fired,
Okay.
and we got back to the hotel, and Gads and Wes had been drinking ever since they got back to the hotel, I think, because they were right into it.
The having Bill Hunter as a coach, one of Edmonton's most famous hockey men. Share with us a couple memories you have of Bill.
He was a great guy. He was a real gentleman, but he tried to be really gruff, but boy, he'd do anything for you. And he had all kinds of sayings. To this day, I still use some of them. One of my favorites is if you steal one idea, that's theft. If you steal two ideas, that's research. And he was a great hockey man. He was great for this city and getting things started. It was Bill that really brought the NHL and the Oilers to Edmonton, and he had the support of others, but he was the driving force. And we had a lot of good times at the Oil Kings. And my last year we played Flin Flon in the Western Canada playdowns, and they had Reggie Leach and Bobby Clark on their team. And one of the greatest things was flying up there. We drove bus to Saskatoon, then we took a DC-3 from Saskatoon to Flin Flon, and somewhere when we were up, the back door came open. So
Mid-flight.
So the co-pilot comes back and just holds onto a bar, reaches out. It wasn't fully open. It was open by maybe 6 inches. Held on, grabbed it, closed the door, locked it again, then got a rope, tied it to the door, and tied it to the back of my seat.
Hey, buddy, you hold on to
And
this one.
so, I went through the last part of that flight wondering if I was going to make it to Flin Flon, but that was an incredible place to play.
Pretty spirited
Especially-
hockey arena.
You could hear their chant in their locker room from all over, and the fans there were incredible. A few times we had to get taken back to the hotel by the RCMP, and it was quite an existence of a great fan base up there.
Now, memory serves, was it Reggie Leach or Bobby Clark who knocked you out with a stick or something?
No, it was one of their defensemen.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'm trying to think of his name. I can't remember his name. He cracked me over the head, and I
Probably
went out.
got a 2-minute minor for that back in the day.
If he got a penalty at all. And I came to and got up, and there was the two McAneely brothers on our team fighting their whole team. So had to get in there and help them.
Now, the McAneelys were some spirited Twins teammates that you had. Any other teammates pop into mind when you think back to those Oil King days?
Oh, he's some great. Ian Wilkie was the goaltender, and Al Cameron was a center that him and I played with through midget and juvenile and into the Alberta Junior League and then to the Oil Kings. So Yeah, a lot of great players. All of those players were before the draft, of course. So
Okay.
then once I finished playing and went to Detroit every summer for a few years, and then training camp, I decided to come back and learn the business, and so started learning the business. And then the next year, the World Hockey League came along. So
Yeah.
some of these guys all signed for pretty big money, but
You just missed it.
just missed it by a year.
Did
but-
you ever think to go back?
No.
No,
I
good.
just thought I've made a decision. I'm learning the business, and so be it. And
Yeah.
let's carry on.
You guys won the Memorial Cup.
No, not with me. Before
Oh,
me,
right.
before me, and
Oh, that's right. You didn't win it.
I didn't win it. No, you did.
That was
Yeah,
my team
Yeah,
then.
right. That was you.
It's an old joke that I'll probably use a number of times again in the future. But yes,
Yeah, you won.
yes.
I didn't.
Okay. So, Memorial Cup, Oil Kings was it 65, 66? I think they won.
They won with
Yeah.
Bobby Falkenberg and Al Hamilton. They had a pretty good
Just
team.
for anyone listening, I had the real pleasure playing in the Cup twice. Lost once with Saskatoon and won it once with Kamloops in '92. So, yeah, I'll bug Rick for a long time that I got a ring, he didn't. But he got a $1,000 signing bonus from the Detroit Red Wings. I did not. I definitely most didn't. You had the chance when you went to that camp. Mr. Hockey was there, was he not?
Yeah, Gordie Howe was on the team. Well, they used to take us as underages for a hockey school every year. So that's the first time I met Gordie. We were in the old Olympia, and in the summertime it'd get really foggy there, so you had to get out and skate to break up the fog. And we did that. So we were just out horsing around, and Gordie was out, and he had the two boys, Mark and Marty, out, and we were just playing around. And
Yeah.
I backed into him sort of in front of the net, and he just put one hand under my butt and lifted me up and over to the side. He was the strongest guy I've ever seen, but just a super guy.
Well, what an experience that was. Back here in Edmonton, those days between the Oil Kings to the WHA Oilers to present day Oilers of the NHL, you mentioned, Bill Hunter had a significant play in all of that happening. Just, what memories do you have, Dad, from the old rink to the new rink, and just how that all came to be?
What all started with Bill Riley from the World Hockey League, and I think they were causing some concern to the National Hockey League, and they over time they thought, well, maybe we better expand with these guys and talk to them. So Bill Hunter was a driving force to that. Zane Feldman and Dr. Allard here in Edmonton were the big financial supporters, and they wouldn't have got it done without them. But Bill was a driving force, and Benny Haskins out of Winnipeg, and I think there's 4 teams, Quebec and
Winnipeg?
New England, somewhere in can't remember the name. Anyways, those were the ones that ended up in the merger, and
Okay.
and so they started playing in the World Hockey League in the old Edmonton Gardens. And as we found in this city, if you host events, that's the best way to get facilities. And so the new at the time Coliseum out at Edmonton Northlands was built because of the Commonwealth Games for '78. So it was built, but by the way, then we're getting an NHL hockey team, so
Right.
it worked very well.
So hold it. The Coliseum was built because of the Commonwealth Games?
It was helped the
Or a part
feds
of
and
it?
as part of it, and it helps
I
with
don't
the
know
financing.
I don't know if I ever knew that. Obviously Commonwealth Stadium. Now, just as a great little segue from that to the positions you've held with some significant events here in Edmonton, you were one of the vice presidents of the '78 Commonwealth Games. Tell me about that experience. How did that come to be, and some pop-out memories you have from it?
Well, it was really fluke how it came to be. My dad, your grandfather Jim, was always a big one to say, if we're going to do business in this city, we have to participate and give back. And so he and my mom belonged to various charity groups in the Kinsman Club and the Rotary, and so I'm not even sure how it happened, but somebody came to me and said, would you be interested in being the volunteer chair of transportation for the Commonwealth Games, and that was in about '75. And so Dad and I talked about it. I thought, yeah, that's a good opportunity to give back and to do something like that. And so I did it. And then it must have been around '76, one of the vice presidents of the time, Lyle Roper, took ill. And Maury Van Fleet, the president of the Commonwealth Games Organizing Committee, asked if I'd move up and be vice president. So I was pretty young at the time, but I thought, yeah, why not?
Yeah.
So it
You're
ended
what,
up,
about 30 years old?
yeah, I think I was 28 or 29.
Yeah.
Ended up with not only transportation but hospitality and media and venues. So
Right.
it was a big job, but boy, what an education! It was a great education for me, and a great way to give back to the community.
And you got to participate in some of the conversations of like you say, the event infrastructure being built here in Edmonton, which stands to this day. Any memories jump out during that time?
Yeah, I think for the Coliseum, there was just not the Commonwealth Games coming. But at the time, Edmonton Northlands board in particular, I think it was Ted Milden and Harry Hull that were big driving forces to get that building done through Edmonton Northlands. The Commonwealth Stadium, the driving force at that time was Norm Kimball and Jim Hull. And the pool down at Kinsman Park was the Kinsman Club that was sort of driving that. So many members of the community were driving forces and getting it done, and because they were facilities for the Commonwealth Games, the good part of it, the city supplied the land, and the province and the federal government came up with the money for construction. A lot cheaper then.
A lot cheaper then.
A lot cheaper.
But I'm sure there were just as many, or maybe there weren't. Do you feel there were just as many against it in whatever day, that it was always a big investment? Didn't matter what year it was.
No, exactly. There's always those that are for things like that, in particular for upgraded infrastructure, and there's always the naysayers, and those are against it. During the construction of the Commonwealth Stadium, Jim Hull tried to convince City Council to put the footings in that would enable to then cover it at some point.
Oh, okay.
Those footings at the time were gonna cost, I think, around $1 million. And
we could have had a dome for $1 million bucks.
No, the footings for the dome.
Footings, okay.
But it would have been a lot cheaper to put in the footings for that than we looked at it a number of years after that with the Eskimos, and it just was too expensive to do a roof.
So '78 started your, I'll call it, whether it's a love affair or not, but being very close to Commonwealth Stadium. Your next part of that journey, I believe, was the 84 Grey Cup. You were a chair of the Grey Cup.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think you were chair of every Grey Cup up until the last one.
Yeah, or co-chair. Dwayne Venue laughs now that he's got me on the number of Grey Cups committees he's been involved with here. But for the '84, first time I was ever going to be in Edmonton, Jack McMahon, who was chairman of the Eskimos then, and Norm Kimball came to me and asked if I'd consider chairing it in '82, and so we took it on, and first time ever for a Grey Cup in Edmonton, and it was a great success, and doing that led me to the Eskimo board, and I was on the board for a number of years, and then chair in '87, '88, and in '87, that's where we won our first Grey Cup, but at least I did.
Yep.
And I have a Grey Cup ring, and you don't.
Yes.
I have a few more.
You have a few Grey Cup rings. What do you have, 3? 4?
Three.
4, 3.
And one Pacific Coast League
okay.
championship.
Baseball. Right. Yeah, I should bring that up, that I think Terry Jones referred to you as you're Mr. Teflon right up until the day you decided to sell the Trappers out of town.
No, he didn't like it. He didn't like it. Hugh Campbell didn't like it. Hugh loved going down there. But here's the facts.
Yeah.
Calgary had left the PCL. Vancouver had left the PCL. The only team left was in Edmonton. The owners in the U.S. did not like that. They did not like crossing the border. They didn't like the different money. And they kept forcing the issue, and we said no, because at that time the Eskimos owned it. We bought it from the Alberta Treasury Branch when the Pocklington Empire went down. And the commissioner at the time, Branch Rickey, kept telling me, you've got to sell, you've got to sell. And we said, we have no need to, and we enjoy it, and it's good for the city. And then the following year, they gave us, out of a schedule of 160 games, of which 80 are home games, they gave us about half the schedule. There was about 35 games, I think, out of the 80 that they scheduled for home dates here from the latter part of March till before the long weekend in May.
Oh.
Now, you try to run a baseball team in the city in March, April, and even into May, it's very difficult.
Drive the Zamboni over from the Coliseum.
Yeah, so we finally got the message and decided, we can't continue to fight this. So we sold to Round Rock Baseball out of Texas, which is the Nolan Ryan family.
Okay.
And we sold it for, I think it was $10.5 million US.
We
paid $4 million Canadian.
Yep.
And we took those profits and we redid Clark Park for when we put in the turf, and we held on to the rest that created the Eskimo Stabilization Fund, and then we put some major money into the expansion prior to 2010 when the recreation center was built there.
Nice. So a lot of good came out of your just terrible decision to sell the. I'm kidding. Okay, we jumped way ahead in some of your sports history there. I'm just going to loop back for a moment. So you had a great run, early involvement with the Commonwealth Games, the Grey Cup, the board of the Eskimos. This whole time you're still working in the moving business. You're running Western Moving, Allied Van Lines at the time. Kind of came up to a moment where you said, well, we could give this business to my son Rob, or we could sell it all right now and run for the hills. And what was your choice at that time?
Well, we weren't going to give it to anybody, including you.
And, okay. I didn't know if that was an
I must
option
remind you that we did have some conversations about, did you want to come into the business at the time, and you said no. So I
was 8 years old,
yeah,
Dad.
yeah.
I don't know.
No, you're a little older than that.
Older than that.
Yeah. Anyways, we had at that time we were a significant shareholder of Allied Van Lines as well, and a company by the name of NFC out of the UK owned Allied Van Lines around the world except in Canada. So they were very interested in coming in here and came in, and we ended up selling.
Yep. So, which, as I alluded to earlier, Ted and Sean are back in the business. So there was an intermission break of the Lullisher family being in the moving biz.
Yeah, we had 5 years that myself or Ted couldn't go back into the business, and
okay.
So Ted sat out the 5 years on
5 years
different
in a
things,
day, and then went back at it.
Started up.
Good for him. They built a great business.
Yeah.
You were hired at that time, if memory serves, it was around 92, 93, as the first CEO of what was known then as the EDE, Economic Development Edmonton. Tell us about that, how that all came to be.
Yeah, I had we'd sold the company in 90, and I had an agreement to stay on for 2 years as the president, of which I did. And then I had no idea what I was going to do. I actually started to do a little bit of looking at the potential of a Western Hockey League franchise in Kelowna. That was well before the Kelowna franchise was awarded.
Yeah.
And one day I got a call from Price Waterhouse, who was doing a search for Economic Development Edmonton, the new board of directors for CEO. And so I thought about it, and I thought that would be really interesting. And so I went forward with my application, and they did a bunch of interviews. And I was hired in July of 92, and I think it was July of 92, and started September 1st of 92, and there was me as Economic Development Edmonton. And come January 1st, 93, the whole plan was to merge the various authorities all into one.
Right.
And so on
The Research Park, Shaw Conference,
Edmonton Convention Center at the time,
Yep.
the Edmonton Research Park, the Edmonton Tourism, and Edmonton Economic Development all came into Economic Development Edmonton. So
Yeah.
we merged them all come January 1st, 93, and then made adjustments to all the various staffs, and we became one and continued on until I left there in 98, thinking that 6 years was enough in that position.
Yeah.
And we just finished the whole role of keeping the Oilers in Edmonton.
Right.
That really took up all the time in the last couple of years of that.
Well, right
job.
around that time, not only the Oilers, but the whole airport issue was pretty hot at that time, or was that a bit earlier?
No, I think the airport. I can't even remember. 96 maybe was
Okay.
it was the airport issue, and at the time, Iris Evans and I became co-chairs of the push to stop consolidate the passenger flights, not close the airport, consolidate the passenger flights to the Edmonton International Airport, because we were getting killed in direct flights from Edmonton, and I was. Remember this to the day, going to see Hollis Harris, who was the CEO of Air Canada in Montreal. And he'd been previously with, I think it was American Airlines out of the US. And he told me that with the change of aircraft coming and the regional jets, that if we didn't get this corrected, Edmonton flights would be to Calgary and to Vancouver, and then you'd have to connect.
Nowhere else.
And he said, until you blow up those runways, you'll always have the problem. And so we were fortunate enough to win the day of the majority of Edmontonians
Went to vote.
went
Yep.
in favor of consolidating. And so we got the consolidation going, and then from that point, there was the push eventually to close the municipal airport. But the key to me was the flights. Of if you can't get direct flights to Toronto or Montreal or Ottawa or the U.S., man, you are a second-level city.
Yeah.
And how we would ever retain companies like PCL and Stantec here without those direct flights, we saw enough with Shaw leaving eventually.
Right.
That was part of it. So it just made a lot of sense, and now we see what the international airport is, and today it's not that far out there anymore.
Yeah. It's amazing how things get closer. 20 some years later, the Muni turning into Blatchford development, was any of that discussed at the time? Like it obviously has not hit traction point yet. Just what are your thoughts on the redevelopment of that space?
Well, there wasn't any discussion at that time. It was to keep it as a sort of a business airport for the charter aircraft. There was a big operation there of aircraft repair, and I think at that point in time, there's a feeling we could keep it open as a commercial type airport for private use and business use. And eventually, I guess cost catches up with you, but. I was in no discussion whatsoever about the recommissioning of the airport lands to now, and I guess it's sat there for quite a few years, and hopefully they can get some development there, because they also have the Northlands land now to deal
Right.
with. So there's a lot of land that the city's involved with.
If you own those two pieces of land today, what are you going to try and do both simultaneously, or what do you think the city should be doing?
Well, personally, I'd sell it to a developer and let them do it.
Okay.
It's going to be a lot of years. May be different, but I just see it's going to be a lot of years until all of that gets developed.
Could be 40, 50 years.
Oh, could be.
Easy.
It could be. I think you got to do it in sections and let the developers do it.
So you mentioned a big initiative during your time at EDE was keeping the Edmonton Oilers in town, and I remember that. I was working at the Edmonton Sun then, where one day they think it's sold and then it's not, and great memory I have. The Journal folks won't love this memory as much, but the Journal went with probably the biggest headline we'd ever seen them use, that the Oilers were sold, and they were wrong. and the next day, our guys at the Sun editorial, they literally ripped out the headline just enough so you knew it was from the Journal, and then is twice the size, put "not" across the front. So fun days in the media landscape, but obviously a critical time to keep the Edmonton Oilers in Edmonton. What do you remember from that?
Oh, there was many starts and stops. It went on for a few years. There was some incredible stories to it. The first part, we thought when we had an original deal, we thought that we could work a deal where we could get additional revenue through pay per view, and
Okay.
I'm glad we didn't at that time, because it didn't go over so big into the future. But there was starts and stops, and we had Bettman here a number of times, and meeting with City Council, and so we were fortunate that there was a fair amount of driving forces. And John Ramsey was the chairman of EDE then, and myself and some of the Northlands people. We're trying to do what's best for the community, and it was to keep the Oilers here. There's no question. And at the end of the day, the group of community leaders came together and put money in, a large group of them. We even got $1 million from Linda Hughes at the Edmonton Journal.
Yes.
Maybe she felt bad about the headline. I don't know, but they were investors.
Sorry we got it wrong.
Yeah.
Here's $1 million.
Yeah, so they number of investors, and during the negotiations, we ended up with the new owners. I guess at the time, the first time, Pocklington was keeping it and staying here, and we ended up getting a special share in the Edmonton Oilers that was held by Economic Development Edmonton, and we only had one vote, and that vote was to 100% of the shares to if you could move the team or not. So that was the sort of the catalyst of that.
Okay.
Keeping it here, and then it was after that that the local community leaders came together and eventually
How many
bought
owners
it
were there
from
then?
I think there was about 35, 36, and
Yeah.
they ended up buying it from the Alberta Treasury Branch, who
Okay.
by that point had taken it from Pocklington along with the Trappers, and that's when we bought the Trappers as the Eskimos.
Right. Now you weren't involved with. Well, you were on the board then, or involved with the Eskimos that
No,
way.
I wasn't. I
Oh,
was
okay.
actually
Just, intermediary.
after the Oiler deal. I was actually just doing a little bit of consulting for at the time Jim Hull, Bruce Seville, and Denny Andrews, looking at the possibility of buying the Trappers.
Okay.
And once I looked at it for a time, I thought, I went to them and said, you could do this as community leaders, and here's how it would work. But it seems to me this would be a great fit for the Eskimos, and we could maybe do some cross-marketing. I wasn't with the Eskimos then. The cross-marketing, some back-end savings of administration, and so we went to Hugh Campbell, and at the time Ernie Stevens was the chair, and we all got together and laid it out, and everybody thought it was a good idea. So we went to
my ball team.
we went to the Treasury Branch and did the deal.
Geez, they were just selling teams left, right, and center back in the day. As your time was winding up with Economic Development Edmonton, the Oiler deal had just been done. There was this moment in time where you were potentially going to be more involved with the Oilers, but then the World Championships came along. What do you remember from that time?
Yeah, we were actually, when I was still at EDE, we were involved as EDE in the potential bid of the World Championships in athletics. In '97, we looked at it, and Jack Agrias and a few guys, Bob Stedward, were the two leaders of getting that done. And so in '98, I was gone from EDE then, and we went to the bid, and we won it. We were fortunate enough to win it, and then the bid committee asked me to take over as the CEO of the organizing committee. So that started in January 1st of '99.
That was a great event for the city. That I remember. So the summer of 2001. That all of 30 days later, 9/11 happened, and you think how it wouldn't have happened.
Absolutely. there's so many things could have happened with that, and we were very fortunate of being able to bring the world to Edmonton for track and field. It was the first time that track and field world championships have been held in North America. That's still the case. I think actually the next one coming up is going to be in Oregon for the first time since '01. So I think it was a real feather in the cap of the city. The volunteer base was incredible. We ended up with about 10,000 volunteers that just did an outstanding job, and it was very successful. And we actually run it at a budget less than our budget, and ended up having some money left over to create some funds for the community.
Nice. And again, like a lot of legacy from the different tracks around town that they were able to invest in. The right on the heels of that, you went back to football in another Grey Cup. The O2 Grey Cup was coming to Edmonton. I know you're chair of that, and that kind of introduced your segue into working for the Eskimos with Hugh Campbell, and what nice little 10-year chapter there about.
Well, what happened after the World Championships were over? We wound it up on December 31st of '01, and so then Jonah and I went to Australia. We didn't have a job, neither one of us, so we thought, why not travel for a bit?
Go surf.
So we did. Yeah, we didn't surf, but we went to Australia, New Zealand, and came back, and it was, I think, April or May, and I was in having coffee with Hugh, and they were having the Grey Cup in '02. And he said, we got a few challenges. Would you consider coming in and overseeing the Grey Cup committee for '02? And so I did. And we then had the Grey Cup in November of 2002. And then in December, Hugh in his way said, well, you're here, you've got an office. I'm going to retire soon. Why don't you stay? So I stayed.
Okay. And what, three Grey Cups later over that time?
3 Grey Cup rings, 2. Just
Yep.
two
Oh, two, right.
Grey
Your third
Cup
was
winners.
with 87.
Yeah, third
Yeah.
was in '87.
Okay.
We won it in '03 and '05.
Yeah.
And we held the 2002 and the 2010 Grey Cups, and over that time, so it was very successful, sort of on the field and off the field.
Great memory line I have of Hugh Campbell. Obviously, he was not a fan of the celebration in the end zone after a touchdown, and I think you guys had brought someone in. It was their first game, got a touchdown, did quite the dance, and after the game, Hugh went up to him and said, "Look, next time you get in the end zone, why don't you act like you've been there before?"
Exactly. That was his line to all of them. That hot dog in the end zone always.
Hey, we're coming back to that moment because that has changed over the years.
Oh yeah.
So you had a really nice chapter at the Eskimos, community organization. You left a lot of great legacy things there from the Grey Cup, the Eskimos. Obviously, 40,000 fans get to sit in one of your best legacies, and that's awesome new seating for the stadium. You drove that before leaving.
And the top deck, the color did look different on the architect's drawings. Everybody says it's Saskatchewan green, but it really did look different.
We thought it was northern
manufacturer.
Saskatchewan green when we when we selected that. I think it looks really cool. I like it. You go into retirement. You're enjoying retirement, and what was that? 5 years?
6.
6 years of being retired. And folks, he Christmas dinner, he calls the family together. We're bracing ourselves for we're going to get some bad health news or something. And you announced to the family that you were coming out of retirement, which we were all shocked. And this is 6 years later, you retired. And then I don't know if triple shock is worthy of the statement, but you then told us you were going to be CEO of the BC Lions. And then we thought we were being punked at that moment, and you were filming this. How did that opportunity come to be?
Well, first of all, I retired from the Eskimos due to some health things that I got over. But I was sort of, in the 6 years I was more semi-retired in that I was fortunate enough to do some board work with Travel Alberta and then Horse Racing Alberta. So it kept me a little bit active, but it was really weird how it came up. One day Wally Bono called me and to talk about the hiring of Ed Hervey. And Ed had worked for me at the Eskimos. He'd been a player, and then we hired him as a scout. And then that was my last role as an advisor. Sat on the recruitment committee to hire a new general manager, and that's when we hired Ed as a general manager. So I knew Ed well, and so Wally and I were talking about it, and it was after the Grey Cup in 2017, so either latter November, early December, and I said, Wally, that it doesn't surprise me. During the season, I told Joan, I think what's going to happen in BC is Wally will step down as coach. He'll become the president. He'll hire Ed as the general manager, and they'll hire a new coach. And Wally said, I'm not a president, I'm a football guy. And he said, you should come out here. I said, why would I come out there? He says, because we need a president. We haven't had one for 2 years. And I said, oh, well, you never asked me before. Just joking around, really. And he said, would you consider it? And I said, I don't know, but maybe Jonah and I'll talk about it. And so we talked about it, and I think deep down, when I retired from the Eskimos because of the health scare, I retired too quick and made the decision too quick and got over my health problems and would have maybe been there for another 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, I'm not sure. But we'd always missed the football and the CFL people. And so talking about it, we thought, yeah, well, let's treat it as an adventure. I don't know of what it would be like. So I called Wally back and said, we've talked about it. We might consider it. I don't know. And so the next day, David Braley called me, the owner of the club, and said, Wally tells me you might consider coming out. And I said, well, yeah, we'd consider it as an adventure. And I knew David very well from the CFL Board of Governors. I knew Wally very well. I knew Ed very well. And I just thought it was a great fit. And we thought it's close to Edmonton. It's only an hour plane trip away. We can get back and see the grandkids, and maybe you guys too. Okay. But the grandkids are the most important. And
I'm just about the dogs at home in the current family ranking.
Yeah. So we did it, and it actually came together within a week, and I think it was the Friday before we had Christmas dinner on the Saturday that we came to the final agreement, and we told you guys, and you should have seen the look on your faces.
It was incredible. A beauty. Right next to the look on our faces at the 2018 Grey Cup here in Edmonton when you dressed us all in orange for the Spirit of Edmonton breakfast.
Perfect. Yeah, orange is an in thing, Orange is an in color.
Like I joked earlier, we've disowned you from the family for a period. Well, good thing you've got some significant Edmonton stripes on your sleeve, because we'll let this one go. We're heading into the third season. It's the third year where I've asked you, can I be quarterback of the team? And
I'd tell you no.
Okay. So we're on 3 years straight of no, we're up. So don't give me this nepotism, folks, that Rick will hire me for no reason at all. The CFL in general, won't talk about the team specifically, but there's some challenges in major sports and getting the fans out, and maybe just share some thoughts of what you see the CFL's future looking like.
Yeah, and there are some challenges, and it's not just the Lions, it's not just CFL, it's professional sport. There's so many other things to do now. The younger crowd are really geared to their phones, and it's a different market now, and we have to do things to attract that market. And I think Randy Ambrosie, as the commissioner, is taking a very active lead in CFL 2.0. And 2.0 is not just getting an agreement with various countries that play football, good iron football around the world. It's expanding our marketing ability to particularly the younger crowds. And to me, we have to attract the crowds as an event, not as just a football game. It's an event, and I tell people that the ticket to a game as an event is like we used to pay a cover charge to a club, and we need the social areas, and we've had a challenge with that at BC Place. It's a great stadium, but it doesn't have the sort of that social area, so we're doing some things there where the younger crowd can get a $25, $30 ticket, come in with their friends, have a beer, be on their phone, talk, look up, maybe a play or two, go back to their phones, go back to their friends.
Passive watching, yeah.
And treat it as an event, and it's a fun time. And I've told our game day people, like, think outside the box. It's all about the entertainment value of not just on the field. It's from the time they walk into that stadium till the time they leave that the game day has to be an incredible venture for people in order to bring them back.
That's awesome. You've touched so much in Edmonton in your life, Dad, from and most definitely on the sporting front. You've been at the table when they talked about what's this going to look like, what's that going to look like. Do you have some thoughts when you look ahead for the next 10, 20 years of what Edmonton's future holds? What would you like to see start happening today or to realize that down the road?
Yeah, and I'm not sure of what everything, but one of the things I've noticed between Edmonton and Vancouver is the number of people in Vancouver that live downtown. I think Edmonton has some incredible infrastructure downtown now with the new rink and some of the new buildings, but we've got to get more people living downtown. That's what creates the vibe. And we've always known West Edmonton Mall being out a ways has had a somewhat of a negative effect on downtown Edmonton, but you have to get people living downtown to create the excitement and the around it. And I think that's the biggest thing, is just getting more and more people to get into this downtown core and live here, so they don't only live and work here, they play and spend their disposable income in the downtown area.
Yeah. So a day will come where you'll take that orange jersey off, and we'll get you to move back to, not to see me apparently, but to see the grandkids. Yeah. I'm loving that you're loving what you're doing, and I want you to keep doing that, but I won't lie and say I do look forward to that day when we do get to spend more time together, but thanks to a travel schedule, we do get.
Are you going to move to Vancouver?
We are not moving to Vancouver.
No, I'm sure. I don't know. We haven't thought of as long as our health is good, we're enjoying it. We enjoy living in White Rock and the Lions facilities in Surrey, so it's not a massive drive. I don't have to cross a bridge, which is good.
That's good.
And I'm sure at some point we'll be back, but we've enjoyed our time there, but we've also enjoyed many great days, many great years in Edmonton, and I'm sure at some point we'll be back. I'm just not sure when.
What's the airport code in Vancouver? YYC?
YVR.
YVR, that's right. See, it doesn't have near the
YYC is Calgary.
Oh, right. So YVR me. It's not as good as the Yeg Me podcast like we've got here. And Dad, I'm we got to talk about all kinds of things, and I got 100 more questions, but we gotta pack it up. But I'm just beyond proud of everything you've done in your life and what you've done for our city, and I love you, and I'm glad you could join me to just share some stories, some memories of all the great things that you did here in Edmonton.
Well, it's been fun, first of all, for something that I get no pay for. Do I get paid?
I may have offered to pay for parking, but that's since been rescinded.
Yeah, so I've enjoyed it, and I'm really proud of you guys and our family of what you've done here and what Ted and Sean and Carol have done with Western Moving. Still a big part of Edmonton, and Joan and I are still a big part of Edmonton. We, of course, follow it all the time. And we've had some incredible times in the city, and we look for some more coming forward.
Awesome. Well, folks, this was my dad, Rick Lullisher, on the YEGME podcast. I'm Rob Lullisher. Thanks for spending some time listening to today's podcast. Have a great day.
Bye now.
Bye now. Thanks again for joining us, folks. I'm Rob Lullisher, and this has been the YEGME podcast. Be sure to visit our website, www.yeg.me, for more information on the show and some of our past podcasts. Also, some fun YEG swag you can check out. All kinds of good stuff on the yeg.me website. And we look forward to seeing you in future episodes.